When you open an online gaming storefront, what do you see? For the most part, it's downloadable content and various deals for the latest products. When these stores first arrived in between 2005 and 2007, things were different. The 7th generation saw the beginnings of mainstream online play, which now dominates the industry. Oftentimes, the big publishers will gravitate towards multiplayer modes that drive greater engagement. Back in the day, depending on which system you owned, the offering would vary quite a bit. On the 360, we had Xbox Live Arcade, and the Wii's Virtual Console gave access to a massive catalogue of classic titles. Unfortunately, the PlayStation Network, despite offering a reasonable online service, seemed to draw the short straw when it came to downloadable titles. Thanks to its built-in Wi-Fi adapter, the PS3 was my gateway into online play, and early in the system's life cycle, I got into a handful of smaller scale releases. Most of these titles have long been removed from the storefront, yet thanks to the download list under account management, the files are still cached and ready to reinstall. These were the early days of online gaming networks, long before the onset of indie titles and early access. Games released here were cheap to produce and cheap to purchase. They weren't mega hits, but they weren't unfinished either. Instead, these games were more experimental in scope, small diversions that filled in the gaps between major releases. In the order they came out, here is my personal selection of downloadable titles exclusively for PlayStation 3. We start off, simply enough, with Nucleus. Twin-stick shooters were a popular candidate for digital release, and would often release in basic packs with an option to buy the full version later. Nucleus was one of these titles, but it's certainly no Super Stardust or Geometry Wars. The game is far more basic and ultimately shallow when compared to its contemporaries. You're a tiny organism shooting up virulent cells and viruses, dodging your way around enemy projectiles and unleashing the occasional protein bomb for good measure. It's rather basic when compared to the competition. Outside of its medical context, there's not much to see here if you're not a fan of the genre. At the very least, it was cheaper, with a full version retailing at £6.49. Before Incognito Entertainment created the brilliant Warhawk, they put out this overlooked game of cops and robbers. As a bounty hunter, you're vying for the highest score against 3 other opponents. Despite its 2D arcade trappings, the game walks a fine line between fun and chaos. The style of calling all cars is very memorable, falling in line with old-fashioned cartoons. Whether you're smashing your way through a train yard or a winter tundra, the personality is always cranked up to 11. On that note, so too is the core action. The criminals are constantly bouncing back and forth between the vehicles, and efforts to deliver them to the police can end up in many near misses and last-minute saves. I remember the game being brutally difficult on higher difficulties. Trying to unlock all of the cars was a massive pain, as the other drivers were absolutely ruthless. They were constantly knocking you around and refusing to let you score points. That's the aim of the game, but sometimes the frustration can outweigh the fun. At £7.99 it offered decent value for the time, with local split screen also included. Next, we have an effort from the now defunct Japan studio and Game Republic. If you took the Flat Out series and mixed it with Toy Story, you'd get Toy Home. Powered by Havoc physics and the 6-axis motion controls by default, you'll tear your way through various rooms in the house, smashing through obstacles, hitting checkpoints, and collecting items. Much like Calling All Cars before it, Toy Home is an arcade racer. It's all about racking up the highest score and chasing the higher ranks. Thanks to strong level variety, there's plenty of room for multiple routes and taking different approaches. Across every course, the aesthetics are very visually appealing, and the constant string of pop-ups and sound effects encourages the player to push for those score multipliers. Outside of this, however, Toy Home doesn't offer much beyond its base. It did offer some mini expansion packs, but the core gameplay didn't change all that much. With little in the way of alternative modes, the novelty of playing wore off quickly. You'll have had your fill of bashing up items and picking up coins by the end of the first tour. Its price point of £7.99 was rather questionable. If you grew up in the 2000s, you're sure to remember those old Nokia phones and the simple game Snake. Now imagine that, spruced up with snazzy 3D visuals and new game modes. That's Snakeball in a nutshell, developed by Gamula Soft and released in 2007. The game's disco art style and seriously funky soundtrack will immediately grab your attention. As for the game itself, it's okay. You'll drive around the arenas, picking up coloured balls and shooting them into the goals to score points. Of course, you'll have to contend with your AI opponents and enemy machines getting in your way. Where Snakeball does succeed is through its variation on game modes. Sure, you can play the base matches with up to 4 players, but how about modes solely focused on weapons, or collecting as many balls as possible without destroying your craft? This puts the game at the middle of the road in terms of content and quality. Last but not least, we come to Fat Princess, developed by Titan Studios. In 2009, this one received much more marketing and attention in the lead up to release. Upon replaying, it remains rather unique in the PlayStation exclusive catalogue. It's also the biggest in terms of content, with a story mode, gladiator arena, and action for up to 31 bots offline. With a tongue-in-cheek tone, colourful graphics, and class-based gameplay, there's a surprising amount of depth here. With 5 classes and many contraptions to use, this 2D romp is imbued with a lot of strategy. Personally, I always went with the worker and went around collecting resources for upgrades. And just like the title suggests, feeding the princess cake will make her fatter and slow down any capture attempts. Despite all of these strategies, what drags the game down a bit is its length. With no time-limiting capture modes and constant failed attempts at breaking through defences, matches can grind on for a while. With the online servers having long been shut down, bots can only do so much in terms of tactics. Fat Princess was successful enough to spawn a sequel on PS4 and would also make it into the ill-fated PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. It also received a small expansion pack with the Fat Rolls DLC, but Titan Studios closed down in 2010 with just 2 games to its name. As far as gaming mascots go, Fat Princess was very short-lived, and it concluded my foray into downloadable releases. Nowadays, smaller games like this are rare. When early access arrived in the 2010s, priorities for these efforts shifted. It was all about putting together a shell of a product and relying on consumer faith to develop it over time. At times, this generated great success, like Subnautica and The Forest, but in other cases, crappy shovelware like Life of Black Tiger found its way onto the PlayStation Store without much in the way of quality assurance. In addition, the onset of live service models has ensured that titles take up store space for months, sometimes years on end. It seems there's not enough room for middle market releases anymore. In some ways, that's a shame. If nothing else, these smaller downloadable titles have become an unfortunate casualty of more recent business practices. Thanks for watching. Taking a trip down memory lane and talking about some long forgotten games was an interesting diversion. Did you get into any of the releases mentioned? Which smaller scale titles did you enjoy in the 7th gen? Stick them in the comments down below. You can follow my blog and channel at the links in the description.